to this live stream about user acquisition. We will speak about businesses with both web and app. My name is Hannah, and this is Austin. We are both part of the app team here at Google. So moving forward with the agenda, we will focus today on explaining more about the value of app versus web users, giving you some best practices around how to convert web visitors to app users. And finally, Austin will go through the lifetime value measurement between the two of them. So let's get first started by defining and explain more the differences between what we call an mWeb and apps. So starting with the mobile side, so we refer here to internet-enabled properties that are access to the mobile device's web browser, such as Safari, Chrome, and does not have to be downloaded on the device. While native app, mobile application, they have to be downloaded on the device, such as a tablet, smartphone, and so on. Usually, the user can have access to apps through the marketplace, such as Apple Store page or Google Play. In some cases as well, app content can be streamed without any installation. That can also effectively create the same user experience to the audience. So it's important also to mention that the whole discussion around mWeb and app should not really be a debate. It's not an either-or decision. So when you speak to clients and different organizations, it's super important to understand first what are their main goals and discussing more about their digital strategy. Understand how would they want to best reach out to their users across both channels, and understand how you can help them to reach these goals within the right time frame. So it's important to really consider both of these channels together to offer the right value to the end users. So also interesting fact, while web offers a broader reach, apps tend to offer higher engagement. So here are the latest stats from Comscore from 2017 that shows first on from a web perspective that we see 15.7 million unique visitors per month compared to only 7 million on apps. While when it comes to the engagement and minutes spent per each visitor on these channels, it's much higher on apps with the 187 minutes compared to 11.9 for mobile web. And this is important because when you speak to organizations and understand more about their goals, often the goal is also to have the right balance between the reach and the engagement. And that's why it's also important to look at both channels together again to make sure that we can reach these goals. So as marketers, partners, agencies, when we start the dialogue with clients and organizations, it's important to keep a good structure in mind with 4 main steps. So the first step will be around identifying the actions that matter for the business. Moving on to building on a frictionless experience for the end clients and end users. It's important also to have a whole discussion around the measurement to understand the full value of mobile. And fourth, understanding how to further invest in relevant marketing activities. And these discussions are relevant for both app and mobile web. So the idea is to keep in mind that you would want to provide your clients a great experience for their end users on both channels. So keep in mind that it's good to have a good understanding of the dynamic between the existing users and the new ones. So for example, existing users, they may start downloading the app and using the mobile web from time to time. And then they would reopen the app and go to a specific page, or they would go directly to the website. While the new user, they may not know directly about the app, so they will keep looking at the mobile web. And then within the mobile web, they could start downloading the app or just keep being active on the mobile web. So it's important to have a good idea and overview on how this dynamics looks today for your clients. So moving forward with the discussion that we mentioned to help organizations to set up the right strategy to win on mobile. So we mentioned the 4 main steps. So digging deeper into these steps, the first part was around identifying the valuable micro moments of the organization. So what are the moments that matter? What are all the steps that users take? How is the experience defined? And what are the moments that really bring value to the business? The second step is really how can you help clients to build a frictionless experience to avoid seeing, for example, high amount of drop rates between each step of the funnel. So you really want to make sure that you optimize both the mobile site, but also the mobile application to offer the best experience for the end user. Third, the measurement part, understanding really the entire value of the mobile. So defining these micro moments are important, but then you want to make sure that you track them, that you measure conversions, that you understand how to better define them, so that you can better act upon them and set up the right mobile strategy. And finally, where you can really help your clients and organizations is how to further invest in the best relevant marketing activities. So first, again, capturing the value, how to make sure that you optimize towards the right moments, and keep thinking about how can you further help organizations to grow. So it's not only about expansion, geos, and so on, but it's also around the marketing strategy itself, how to bring more engaged users beyond the acquisition part.
Cool. So now that we've kind of talked a little bit more at length on the idea of how web and app are intertwined with one another, we wanted to go through a couple of use case examples of applying this framework to different client verticals and talk about some of the relevant questions that both these clients and you should be asking to make sure that one, you've got an effective strategy from a measurement and attribution perspective in place, but two, you're marketing towards objectives that are obviously driving success and incremental growth for the end customer. So looking at this through the lens in the fintech space, how can an app actually help, let's say, a standard bank? As I'm sure many of you have seen, a lot of banks are employing an app in tandem with their web-based strategy to drive up user engagement, the transference of funds and things of that nature, because it's an easier experience than physically going into a bank or logging in through a portal through web. So thinking about app promotion in general as it pertains to fintech and banking, one of the things that we need to think about is, what are the key, offerings and differences between the online portal and the app? Does the app allow the full stack of capabilities that the website does, such as, transferring of funds, opening and closing of accounts, paying bills or doing money transfers, things of that nature. Once those events are defined across the app and the web, it allows you to see how relative engagement between those actions looks like between the two portals. And the other bucket to think about is, again, more importantly, how do you measure the lifetime value of these customers as they engage with your app versus as they engage with the website? So, what actions specific to the app would be of interest for you to have, focusing on acquiring users to do? What actions are more value and emblematic of repeat users or folks that are, likely to, with higher propensity, be a longer term customer for you, whether that be engaging through the website or through the app. A rule of thumb, best practice we advise is the more tracking the merrier, to be frank, as it pertains to activity within the app, similar to as you would track all activity on the website of things. So applying this framework, switching gears to thinking about the food industry, we're seeing a lot of QSRs, so quick service restaurants, and obviously mobile food delivery companies coming into fruition and tinkering in this space. So they are obviously presented with a unique set of challenges when they are thinking about web versus app. So some of those being, thinking about cutting costs and saving money. Are the restaurants able to maybe change their staffing model if they don't necessarily need people to answer the phone or to have that task added onto their plate? Is there an opportunity to increase revenue or revenue per customer? Do you find that you tend to upsell customers at a higher frequency on the app versus the website because of that frictionless experience? Thinking about, both new and mature customers. Can you acquire new folks that maybe just recently moved to the area or recently purchased a device? So just thinking about, in broader scope, obviously the surface level events and factors such as, who's likely to make a purchase, who's likely to order and order again, but also thinking about, how this pertains to their broader business model outside the scope of acquiring paying users is important to think about. And finally, thinking about this through the lens of retail. So retail, as I'm sure we're seeing across the ecosystem, is booming with these standalone stores launching their own app, or moving a lot of their inventory to be sold through other third-party apps, because they're finding that users are engaging with these apps at a higher frequency and filling their carts and buying bigger amounts of products overall. The retailers need to start, thinking about how can they leverage the technology power of an app to increase that lifetime value of their customers. Does it offer the opportunity to, let's say, cross-sell, based on something that someone used prior or something that they had bought previously? Overall, retail, I think, is a couple of steps ahead of the game in terms of thinking about how they can increase revenue per user by leveraging a strong mWeb and app strategy. And with that in mind, we wanted to do a little bit of a deep dive into retail to uncover some of the insights that we've collected in the last couple of years working in this space as it pertains to the app side of the business. So you can see that the key opportunities that lie for maybe some of those retailers that might sit in your portfolio that have an app but aren't really giving it a lot of love or haven't given thought to potentially thinking about developing an app strategy overall. I think it's no surprise we talked about this a little bit earlier, but mobile apps in general are just changing retail. Not just when we think about your standard brick and mortar stores, but also with the recent upbringing of a slew of pure play retailers that are app and mobile and online focused only. This is a bit dated of a figure, but in 2015 there was recorded 60 billion in sales in mobile apps. As we can assume, that's been growing incrementally quarter on quarter, year on year, substantially. There tends to actually be a higher conversion rate when we think about engagement with the app versus the website. Again, that seamless, frictionless experience that Hannah touched on earlier really alleviates a lot of the barriers to entry for folks to go ahead, add something to their cart, and actually go ahead and make that purchase, particularly with instances of, let's say, saved payment model. You literally already have your payment information stored in the app. Doesn't require that as a step in completing the transaction. And as such, by removing that friction, you have a higher propensity to purchase as a consumer. I'm very guilty of that myself. But overall, none of this should be a surprise to you or to the makeup you're seeing of your customers. So not only obviously is this impacting consumer behavior, but it's also in shifting folks to have a bit more time spent in these apps overall, whether it be directly making purchases or actually going end to end throughout their browsing process. We're seeing more and more time is spent in app to add to cart, to do sort of comparative pricing models and things of that nature that historically we had seen a lot of activity primarily focused on web. We're seeing more and more of folks taking that stack of behavior from the preliminary idea of buying something all the way through to the purchase itself, and then moving that more and more into these these closed wall app ecosystems. It's not to say that web is by any means less valuable to customers, but it is something to take into consideration, especially for retailers that haven't even begun to think about including an app in their overall commerce strategy. Talked on this a little bit earlier, but again, by removing these barriers to entry, we're essentially allowing customers to not only buy at a higher frequency, but buy at a higher shopping cart price per purchase. Again, the ease of adding to cart and simplifying the checkout process has really inflated customer purchase frequency and customer purchase size when they're thinking about this end-to-end within an app.
So we'll move forward now with explaining more on how to find valuable app customers for multiple businesses. So first, earlier we explained the dynamic and the importance of understanding different channels across mobile web and apps. And depending on the strategy that the organization want to take and their goal, there are possibilities to help them to drive existing users, for example, from a mobile website to an application. So what we have seen often is that using interstitial does not really provide the best experience from a mobile perspective and can also affect the search ranking. So what we would advise in this case is to actually use bottom banners that can help the user while they are on the mobile site to get more familiar with the app and may download it easier. So you can also leverage tools such as Customer Match to really promote your app through your most loyal users across Google Search, Play, and YouTube. So here are some very interesting stats around the app and dynamics. So first of all, a third of the App Store visitors will decide whether to install the app or drop within 3 seconds. So this shows how important it is to have a powerful, very strong brand messaging on the app landing page to get the attention of the users within these 3 seconds. It's very important also to localize the app's page content. This can lead to actually a 550% increase in app download. So important to keep that in mind for organizations that want to expand internationally, for example. Third, over 65% of downloads come directly from searches within the App Store. 60% of App Store visitors never engage with the full App Store page. And finally, 50% of App Store installs are driven by explorers, so users who do engage with the full App Store page. So these are important stats to keep in mind when you speak with clients. Remember also that it's super important for organizations to have, as I was mentioning, a very strong landing page. The Play Store listing is actually how the users start to learn about the business and understand about the service and products. And often one of the top challenges is the discoverability part. So as an app developer, it's not only about launching the great app with the best user experience, it's also making sure that the app is discoverable in the market. And today, with the competition and level of apps that we found on the market, it can be a very big challenge. So it's important to keep focusing on the landing page, that you keep in mind the ranking, that you keep track of the feedback that existing users give of the app to really help your clients to understand how they can better improve the user experience. And this will also impact conversion rates and can help businesses today to get a higher level of installs and then be easier found on the store. So universal app campaigns are actually a good remedy to also help around both on the user acquisition side, but also the engagement. So these automated campaigns will run on Conversion Optimizer and use the machine learning in the back end to really help your clients to get their app in front of potential users. So how it works behind the scene. So the system will look at all the input that is used. So the ads, what kind of creatives, visuals, videos do we use? What is the targeting? How do we define conversions? What are the bids and budget that we will set up in the campaign? And based on all these inputs, the machine learning is going to start analyzing historical data. It's going to look at millions of different signals from the user perspective to better understand what drive higher level of conversions. And then depending on these learnings, the system will be able to better redistribute the ads across our properties, so such as Google Play, YouTube, AdMob, and more. So what we do, we really want to match the client's KPIs. So that's why it's important to, when you discuss with the clients, to understand what are the main KPIs, as we mentioned. So in terms of analytics, how do they measure the important moments, as we mentioned earlier, understanding also the overall strategy and goals. And then we will match these KPIs by using Google's powerful signals. So if you think of it, we could leverage and understand how users searches today across all our properties. What is the age, the gender of the user? How do they behave inside existing apps and websites? What kind of videos do they tend to watch on YouTube? At what time of the day? what kind of app do they already have installed in the device. We can also look at signals such as their connection to internet, what time of the day, and what type of device do they have. So the goal, after looking at all these signals all together, we are going to serve the ads to the right user at the right time. So while they are discovering other apps on Play, while they're searching on Google.com, or while they are already engaging with other apps across AdMob, or if they are surfing on mobile web, and finally, while they're watching videos on YouTube. So in summary, a great app can help organizations today to further grow sales by really focusing on the user experience and engagement and try to offer a better value proposition to their audience. Second, to save operating costs thanks to these automated campaigns. And third, help organizations also to improve the brand and messaging by reaching in a more sustainable way to new clients.
Cool. So now that we've kind of done a good job on talking through the differences and complements that mobile web and app have to offer one another, what we wanted to do next is kind of go through how to start a discussion with your clients on thinking about more in-depth measuring the relative value at a user level as it pertains to what they're seeing through their analytics and attribution platforms, but also what types of data that we would be collecting by running ad campaigns. So what I wanted to share is a slide that I put together for some quarterly business reviews with some of our top strategic customers, just helping them dissect and understand how Android, iOS, and web customers stack up against one another. The great thing about this exercise is that, as the slide points out, actually all of these inputs that you would need in order to calculate a baseline LTV of users acquired through AdWords as a channel are actually accessible through their attribution partner, whether it be Firebase, the Google SDK, or a third-party platform, but also within AdWords itself. And it's simply just taking this data, doing some basic calculations to understand the value of users that are acquired over a 30, 60, 90-day time frame. And then partnering with them, them being the customer and their analysts and business intelligence teams, to create a baseline model to say, we spent this much money on AdWords. We acquired these number of customers that on average tended to spend X per purchase or X per engagement is the value that we've assigned to these users over a time frame that we pre-establish. A common one that we've seen is a 30-day time frame or a 90-day time frame if we would like to evaluate on a quarterly basis. And then again, using insights from their business intelligence or data science teams to basically model out what is the retention lifetime of customers that we acquire through AdWords as a channel, and how does that value of that user deteriorate over time? Do we find that it's actually static? If we acquire someone that makes a purchase within the first 90 days, we can predict that they'll make at least one purchase every 3 months for the next year and a half, because we've done a regressional churn analysis on customers that we acquire and that fall out of our customer pool over time. So a lot of these inputs do require an advanced hands-on dialogue with your customers to really help them shift their mindset away from thinking about a first purchase, let's say cost per acquisition or a cost per install model. Because as we all know, at the end of the day, acquiring customers for cheap installs is great, but if those cheap installs don't end up being valuable users, then you have essentially invested to inflate your user numbers that aren't driving the bottom line, which is obviously revenue for the customer. So to just kind of go through each of these columns here, to do this calculation, essentially we just need over a predetermined time frame, which again I'd say about a 90-day time frame would be good to identify patterns. Again, as the column header suggests, the investment. How much did they spend in AdWords? How many downloads did they acquire? And we tend to think of downloads when particularly customers are working with a third-party attribution partner, more so in the download plus first open type of user. If we're looking purely at Google Play based installs, what we may find is that users may have actually clicked the install button and brought the app onto their device, but they may not have launched the app. And so that type of user versus someone that actually installs the app and then ultimately opens it to engage with the content is not as high of a value as the latter in that case. So downloads, again, thinking in an install first open type of labeling there. Next, looking at events completed. And this slide and sort of this exercise can be as advanced as you'd like it to be. One of the exercises that we've been taking with customers is, how can we, really break down the funnel from the install all the way through to the revenue driving event. So quite literally going through the customer journey with the client is a great exercise. Okay, I have to install the app. I then have to input my email address. I then will likely search for, let's say, inventory if I'm a shopping customer. I then add to cart, fill out my payment information, etc. And once you've mapped that full journey for an average customer, again, working with their internal teams to understand, what does that conversion rate look like between that install and, let's say, that first step, which could be an email input. What does that conversion rate look like from event 2 all the way through to that revenue driving event, ultimately the purchase. And not just conversion rate between each of the events in the overall funnel, but thinking of relative conversion rates as well. The long and short of it is it's a big ask and a big conversation around getting as much data as possible to get a feel for, one, which event in this user journey, obviously aside from the purchase itself, is most emblematic of a user that's likely to make a purchase down the line. Hannah touched on earlier the idea of running universal app campaigns that give us a myriad of types of events to bid towards. But if we find that, let's say, the purchase event is one that doesn't happen at a high enough frequency, what we may see is little to no scale or poor performance from a universal app campaign because it necessitates a high frequency of event completion for Conversion Optimizer to automate. So then having this full view in the funnel of each of those events that go in between the install and the purchase, that relative conversion rate between the completion of each of those events and ultimately the frequency of those events happening on any given day can help us to calculate and dictate perhaps an alternative or proxy event that would allow us to have enough volume in any given day for Conversion Optimizer to automate towards. And then again, based on a calculation of a CPA of sorts for that event versus the first purchase CPA, put us in a position to match both a healthy volume, but also user quality over time. And then the other pieces to this puzzle here are thinking about average event completions per user. So what I mean by this is, are we measuring just the first purchase event with customers that may not have as advanced of an attribution or analytics purview into their customer base? Or are we measuring the number of purchases that are happening and the value per purchase? Ultimately, the latter is the level of complexity that we want customers to get to, so that way they can think in an LTV-centric mindset as opposed to just a cost per user mindset. And then again, I've touched on this earlier, but the install to event completion rate, and again, mapping that from beginning to end, I think helps us get a very clear picture on what that average user journey looks like. And then the last piece being, again, that value per event. In the case of an in-app purchase, what is that average, basket size in terms of revenue per purchase, and does that vary dramatically between different users? Do we have a slew of folks that maybe make a purchase that's sub $10, but in reality, we're looking for folks that have a higher propensity to purchase for values at, let's say, 100 plus, because we know our customer acquisition costs. So these are all things to tease out when having conversations with the client about, one, evaluating their users, but two, marrying that with an effective AdWords strategy. And the great thing about this is once you have all of these inputs, it very smoothly feeds into a proposal to pitch to your customers. Again, assuming that we have a prediction on the average length of the customer's lifetime and the value of that customer over that lifetime, and assuming that UAC, our Universal App Campaigns, can sustain acquiring users at that value over a predetermined time frame, we can, to a degree, predict the number of installs, the number of purchases, the value per those purchases over a time frame, and let's say a quarterly proposal, and essentially map to a degree for clients, if we invest X, Y can be the potentially expected output. Again, these types of conversations do require a lot of legwork, a lot of homework, and a lot of a lot of questioning from the customer. But at the end of the day, as you saw earlier and kind of throughout the discussion, once we can dictate that value of an app user throughout the entirety of their lifetime, we can better influence the marketing campaigns that we'll run on what events to target and what types of users to go after. Great. So this covers the majority of the content section of the Hangout on Air. We wanted to make sure that we brought to the table a discussion around how we can value web versus app users and how to think about how the two go hand in hand within any average developer's strategy overall. We wanted to take a moment before we start jumping into Q&A to offer the opportunity to reach out directly to our team. We'd love to build a relationship with your agencies, and so feel free to contact us after today's Hangout on Air at app-agency@google.com. We would love to offer the opportunity to teach you more around our app install solutions, how they pertain to specific verticals and business models. We'd love to help you just develop a POV or strategy on apps overall. Again, as we talked about earlier, because they're becoming more and more commonplace across multiple verticals and customer bases. We actually, contingent on the opportunity and the strategic nature of the client, would be happy to work with you on an app client pitch. So that way, again, we can really put pen to paper with some of the principles we've talked about today. And then most importantly, forming a partnership with our app agency team, which is focused on educating our agencies and bringing them up to speed on how to think about Google as a partner in the app growth ecosystem. So with that, we can go ahead and shift gears, move to Q&A. So I'll let you kick it off with whichever one.
Okay, so yeah, I see here. So one question is, how do you know how to best target UAC campaigns? For example, are we able to run multiple types of campaigns simultaneously? So this is a very good question that comes up very, very often. So it's important to know first, yes, you can run multiple campaigns in parallel for both Android and iOS. What's key here, though, as we mentioned in the past, and also as an agency, the value that you can really bring to your clients is while you discuss about the goals and understanding what exactly do they try to achieve. Is it whether that they have just launched an app and that they want to try to acquire new users, or do they want to focus more on the engagement if they already have a strong user base? So all these questions will help you then to set up the right strategy in terms of optimization. So you could run in parallel, for example, a UAC max install to drive scale volume when it comes to user acquisition, and in parallel also focus on the later steps if you want to focus on engagement. So it will really depends, and it is a long-term process, as Austin mentioned as well, when you present a plan and time frame to really dig deeper into each steps of the funnel, understanding the drop rates and how to better set up the strategy. Yeah,
totally. We see it very commonly across verticals to run a slew of UACs simultaneously. I think the key thing here to think about is just valuing the bids and ultimately the users differently, contingent on the goals. Obviously, for a campaign that's purely focused on getting users and installs, we would want to bid with lower intensity relative to, let's say, a campaign that's bidding towards people that are likely to make a purchase. Those folks are obviously a higher value for us, so we want to make sure we bid more aggressively towards that user base. Great. So another question here. What type of, or rather, what vertical of clients do you see the most opportunity in where business owners can utilize a web and app strategy? Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think it boils down to just the nature of consumer behavior, right? You'll see across the board in almost every vertical, apps are playing a role, whether it be purely from a new customer acquisition standpoint, or the increase in user LTV, or purely as an accompaniment to a well built out overall web strategy. Apps to some degree can almost fit in every type of niche business model. It's all just contingent on how complex the offering is, or what the end goal of your customer acquisition strategy looks like. I think the key thing here to think about is, while apps can supplement core web-based businesses for essentially all verticals, it's good to note that not every app that is in the marketplace makes sense to actually pay to promote. This might be intuitive, but one of the things that we found is that in cases where, let's say, a piece of hardware, or quite literally the completion of the user journey, and the actual customer acquisition process takes place in its entirety on the web, and the app again purely serves the purpose of just accompanying the web-based product, or to accompany the customer acquisition that can only be completed on web. Paying to acquire those types of app users doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense, because we like to think of app promotion and user acquisition purely as acquiring new users. And if there's no onboarding flow, or in order to effectively use the app product, purchasing some type of additional hardware or product, or becoming a web-based customer is a necessity, then paying for those types of users isn't technically paying for new customers. It's paying for folks to download an app on their device that they can't then go through that customer journey on. Cool.
I can continue here with the is it advised to use Google Analytics for mobile measurement? So this is also a question that comes up very often, and it's important to keep in mind that Google Analytics, it's a very strong platform for web and mobile web. However, when it comes to apps, universal app campaigns will not be supported when tracking with Google Analytics. So in that matter, we really advise understanding also what would best fit for the clients. There are different solutions that we usually recommend. One alternative would be Firebase, which is kind of Google Analytics, but applied for mobile, that can really help clients to dig deeper into the user experience across the app, where you will be able to track all the events and make sure that you can set up campaigns that will optimize towards the lifetime value of the users. In addition to Firebase Analytics, we work with different third-party attribution partners that you can also find on AdWords interface, and our team can also give you some best options depending on the business. Yeah.
Great. And to get more intel on some of those preferred third-party partners, you can do a simple search for Google App Attribution Partner Program, and it'll take you to a page where we detail sort of the nature of the relationship with these partners, and how they integrate seamlessly with AdWords. Okay, great. The next one, is there any risk of running web and app install campaigns concurrently? What about the idea of traffic cannibalization? That's another great question. I think at the end of the day, it's important to think about the nature of the consumer's behavior, right? If someone is looking to do, let's say, the browsing behavior, or there's a high indirect intent for someone to go through and complete whatever action that they can make within this app, the nature of their queries and the nature of sort of the activity on the back end that we were tracking to leverage as targeting mechanisms do help us essentially create the best service of the best type of ad, contingent on what the signals are telling us. The long and short of it is, we primarily work with customers that do sit in this hybrid space where SEM and traditional web traffic and user acquisition and acquiring net new users for the app are equally, if not weighted in value in terms of overall growth for their business. And it is very common to run SEM campaigns, again, that follow your traditional path to very advanced keyword lists that are very robust, that could be more longer tailed or tailored towards particular user behaviors. UAC will take that into consideration and essentially, based on what goal that has been set for it, identify in any given auction, and thinking specifically around search through this lens, in any given auction, which ad, whether it be an MWeb ad or a UAC auto-generated app install ad, will have the highest propensity to drive a conversion or to collect that user that the customer is ultimately targeting. And based on that factor, and again, the myriad of signals that UAC looks at in order to pick users, or rather pick inventory to target the best types of users, it will either pull itself out of that auction or surface that ad based on those signals. So some of the things that I've heard in the past, well, is there a risk of let's say UAC eating up SEM traffic in terms of just overall mobile search altogether? Again, I think it's more so to reframe the mindset around, well, what is the end goal when it comes to mobile, right? Thinking around this LTV discussion and valuing users differently. Sure, UAC may pick up on some queries that a mobile-based browser search historically would pick up on its own. But if the users that UAC is targeting through browser-based search tend to be of higher value for the customer, and at the end of the day, driving more revenue, then I think that the question becomes, not how do I serve the two equally, or how do I, or rather becomes how do I allocate based on user value.
Okay, we can go maybe with the one last question. And yeah, so someone asking would like to know about the agency certification and the education program. So definitely we advise here to reach out to the app agency team that Austin mentioned. So really feel free to drop a mail, and someone of our team will reach out and explain more about the process to make sure to engage and collaborate in the long term. So thanks for asking. Great.
And those seem to be all the questions that we have at this time. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for your time. I'm Austin.
I'm Hannah. Thank you for today, and we hope to see you soon again. Have a good day.